A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
Hi, Herman and Corn. So one of the interesting developments in today's warfare between Iran and Iran against Israel and the US, the coalition, was in a world first, an Israeli F-35 shot down an Iranian jet in air-to-air combat over Tehran. So this is very noteworthy for a number of reasons. Firstly, it's reportedly the first air-to-air takedown of any kind of F-35. It's also the first air-to-air combat that the IDF has engaged in 40 years, apparently, or a direct takedown of enemy aircraft. And this was the F-35I, which is the Israeli modified version of the baseline F-35. This, I recall, was quite a controversy that the Pentagon wasn't so pleased with when they were selling the F-35 to Israel. The Adir, as it's called here, they weren't so happy about the level of modifications that Israel was seeking to apply in order to work around the avionics and put its own electronic warfare capabilities and systems into the aircraft. But this was and the other plane was the Yak-130. It's a training aircraft operated by the RIAAF, the Iranian Air Force. I'm guessing that is the Artesh, as we talked about before. The difference between the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, who were responsible for the ballistic missile program, and the Artesh, this army that was the standing army of Iran under the control of the Shah when the guards took over, and still exists alongside them as a fighting force, but really has legacy carriers. And this is kind of typical, right? They have some of these Russian-made aircraft, and they've also got really old generation, like I think the F-4's. So there's two things I guess I'm interested in from today's report. The first is that we've seen these depictions of dogfights in Hollywood that probably aren't a very good bar stick for what it actually looks like in reality. And I was reading today, I don't think it was reported at what distance this takedown occurred, but that in typical circumstances, you have an aircraft that has such electronic warfare superiority that it's going to disable the radar of the other aircraft. The Iranian aircraft was apparently on a counter drone operation, and that it's that electronic warfare component that is so effective that the striking aircraft just needs to be within striking distance, and it could be 40 or 50 kilometers out, and there's no visual element in some instances. So curious to know, firstly, if that's if that was accurate information according to your sources, and secondly, and this brings into question, I guess, really the importance of the types of aircraft that we see, military aircraft, because the F-35 isn't just it's not like a product you can buy on AliExpress, needless to say, but it's not just another military aircraft. It's a really, really sophisticated advantage for countries that operate it. And the US has had to very carefully control whom it will sell these, or who Lockheed Martin can sell these aircraft to, as well as their air defense systems. And it's not an open market. So I'd be interested to know exactly how that operates in practice regarding, who the US will even consider selling one of these systems to if a country had the money. Because we see this in this case where we have a Russian Yak-130 and the F-4's, that presumably the secret here is that it's simply a much better aircraft, and therefore it succeeded in taking down this aircraft. The Yak-130 was apparently introduced by the Russian Air Force in 2010, and the Italians have a version that they adopted in 2015. Apparently also used in Israel, actually, as a training aircraft, but not for actual operations. So Herman and Courtney love to know a little bit more about this in today's episode of My Word Prompts.
Hey everyone, welcome back to My Weird Prompts. I am Corn Poppleberry, and we are coming to you from a very rainy, very electric Jerusalem today. It is March 4th, 2026, and the energy in the city has been something else lately. The news coming across the wires is even more intense than the weather.
Herman Poppleberry here, and you are not kidding, Corn. I have been glued to the defense feeds all morning. Our housemate Daniel actually sent over a prompt that perfectly captures the magnitude of what just happened. He was asking about that world-first engagement between an Israeli F-35 and an Iranian jet.
It is a massive story. We are talking about an Israeli F-35I, the Adir, shooting down an Iranian Yak-130 over Tehran. Daniel pointed out that this is the first manned air-to-air kill for the F-35 program globally. While the Adir took out some drones back in 2021, this is the first time a fifth-generation stealth fighter has swatted a manned jet out of the sky. It is also the first time the Israel Defense Forces have had a confirmed air-to-air takedown of a manned aircraft in over 40 years, dating back to the mid-80s. That is a generation of pilots who have focused on ground support and missile defense, suddenly finding themselves in a classic intercept.
And the fact that it happened over Tehran is a detail that cannot be overstated. That implies a level of penetration and air superiority that we usually only see in simulations. Daniel wanted us to dig into two specific things. First, is modern air combat really just an electronic warfare game played from 50 kilometers away? And second, how does the United States manage the export of this kind of god-tier technology without losing their own strategic edge?
Those are the right questions. I think people have this Top Gun image of dogfighting in their heads. You know, twisting and turning until you can see the rivets on the other guy's cockpit. But this engagement seems to suggest we are in a completely different era. Herman, you've been reading the technical papers on the Adir modifications for years. What makes the Israeli version so different from the standard F-35 that everyone else flies?
This is where it gets really interesting, and it actually ties back to some of the friction between the Pentagon and the Israeli Ministry of Defense. When the United States sells the F-35 to most countries, it is a very controlled package. You get the plane, you get the software, but the software is essentially a black box. You cannot touch the source code, and you cannot easily integrate your own hardware. But Israel, because of the unique threats they face and their own advanced defense industry, demanded a level of access that no other country has.
Right. They call it the Adir, which means the mighty one in Hebrew. And it is not just a fancy name. They basically gutted parts of the avionics to put in their own electronic warfare suite, right?
Precisely. The Israeli Air Force worked with Lockheed Martin to create a specialized interface. This allows Israel to install their own command and control systems, their own C4 architecture, and, most importantly, their own electronic warfare systems on top of the existing architecture. Crucially, Israel is the only country allowed to maintain its own mission data files. These are the digital threat libraries that tell the plane what a Russian radar looks like versus an Iranian one. Most countries have to wait for the United States to update those files at Eglin Air Force Base. Israel does it in-house.
So, let's address Daniel's first question. Is it all just electronic warfare now? Daniel mentioned targets being disabled or struck from 40 to 50 kilometers away without a visual element. Is that the reality of 21st century air combat?
It is, and it is even more extreme than that. In the world of fifth-generation fighters, if you are close enough to see the enemy plane with your own eyes, something has gone horribly wrong with your mission plan. The goal of the F-35 is to be a sniper, not a brawler. It uses what we call sensor fusion. It takes data from its own APG-81 radar, from its distributed aperture system cameras, from other planes, from satellites, and from ground stations, and it creates a single, unified picture for the pilot.
I remember we talked about this a bit in episode 625, when we were looking at radar and electronic warfare. The idea is that you want to kill the enemy before they even know you are in the same zip code.
And the electronic warfare component is the shield and the sword in that scenario. It is not just about shooting a missile. It is about jamming the enemy's radar so they cannot see you, or spoofing their sensors so they think you are 5 miles away from where you actually are. In this case, the Iranian Yak-130 is a capable trainer and light attack aircraft, but it is effectively blind when matched against the electronic noise and stealth profile of an Adir.
It is fascinating because the Yak-130 is a Russian design. It is used by the Artesh, which is the traditional Iranian military, as opposed to the Revolutionary Guard. It is a nimble little jet, but it is a fourth-generation platform at best. Against a fifth-generation stealth fighter with Israeli electronic warfare modifications, it is like bringing a very sharp knife to a drone strike.
That is a great analogy. And to Daniel's point about the distance, 40 or 50 kilometers is actually quite close for a beyond visual range engagement. The missiles the F-35 carries, like the AIM-120D, have ranges well over 160 kilometers. But in a dense urban environment or a heavily defended airspace like Tehran, you might wait until you are closer to ensure a high probability of kill and to minimize the chance of the enemy detecting the launch and deploying countermeasures.
So, if the electronic warfare suite is doing the heavy lifting, what is the pilot actually doing? Is he just clicking a mouse on a screen?
It is more like being a systems manager. The pilot in an F-35 has a helmet-mounted display that allows him to literally look through the floor of his own plane. If he looks down, the cameras on the outside of the jet project the ground onto his visor. He sees the world as a data-rich environment. When he targets the Yak-130, he is not aiming a crosshair. He is designating a track that the computer has already identified as a threat. The electronic warfare system is likely already working to suppress the Yak's ability to lock onto the F-35. Once the pilot authorizes the strike, the missile does the rest.
It sounds incredibly clinical. But let's look at the other side of Daniel's question, because this is where the policy and the geopolitics get really thorny. How does the United States control this? I mean, the F-35 is the crown jewel of American aerospace. We sell it to Israel, the United Kingdom, Japan, and several others. How do we make sure that we are not just handing over the keys to the kingdom?
That is the multi-billion-dollar question. The United States uses a process called Foreign Military Sales, or FMS, governed by ITAR, the International Traffic in Arms Regulations. It is not like buying a car. It is a long-term strategic partnership. Every sale has to be approved by the State Department and often reviewed by Congress. There are also end-use monitoring programs like Golden Sentry, where American officials actually go and physically count the missiles and inspect the planes to make sure they haven't been tampered with or sold to someone else.
But Israel is the exception here. Why? Is it just the strength of the alliance, or is there a specific legal framework?
It is both. There is actually a United States law that requires the government to ensure Israel maintains what is called a Qualitative Military Edge, or QME. This means that by law, the United States has to ensure that Israel has the military capability to defeat any credible conventional military threat from any individual state or possible coalition of states. Because Israel lives in a neighborhood where they are constantly threatened by actors like Iran, the United States determined that giving them the ability to customize the F-35 was necessary to maintain that edge.
It is a calculated risk, though. If you let a foreign country, even a close ally, put their own hardware and software into your most advanced jet, you are creating a variant that might actually be superior to your own in some specific ways. I remember there was a lot of grumbling in the Pentagon about this a few years ago.
Oh, absolutely. There were officials who were worried that if Israeli tech was integrated too deeply, it could lead to data leaks or that the United States would lose the ability to fully understand how the aircraft was performing. But the flip side is that the United States actually learns a lot from Israel's real-world use of the platform. When an Israeli Adir flies a mission over Tehran, the data from that mission helps the United States refine its own tactics and software. It is a two-way street, even if it is a bumpy one.
That brings up a point about the Iranian side of this. Daniel mentioned the Yak-130. For our listeners who might not know, Iran has two separate militaries. You have the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, which gets all the headlines and runs the missile programs. And then you have the Artesh, which is the regular national military. The Yak-130 is typically an Artesh asset. It is a trainer, but it can be armed. Why would Iran have a trainer jet up in the air over their own capital in a way that leads to an engagement with an F-35?
It suggests a few things. One, It could have been a desperate attempt at an intercept after their primary air defenses failed to see the F-35 coming. Or it could have been a patrol that just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. But the fact that the F-35 was there at all over Tehran is the real story. It shows that the stealth and electronic warfare capabilities are doing exactly what they were designed to do. They made the Iranian radar network, which includes Russian-made S-300 and S-400 systems, essentially irrelevant.
It is a huge psychological blow. If you are the Iranian leadership and you realize that a foreign fighter jet can fly over your capital, engage your aircraft, and leave without being touched, your entire defensive strategy just evaporated. It reminds me of Operation Roaring Lion, which we covered in episode 890. The mechanics of modern warfare are as much about the perception of invincibility as they are about the actual hardware.
Definitely. And going back to Daniel's point about the sale of these aircraft, the United States is very selective. Look at what happened with Turkey. They were a partner in the F-35 program, they helped build parts for it, but when they decided to buy the Russian S-400 missile system, the United States kicked them out of the program. Why? Because the United States was terrified that if an F-35 was flying near an S-400 operated by the same military, the Russians could use the data from the radar to figure out how to track the F-35.
That is the ultimate nightmare for the Pentagon. The stealth of the F-35 is its greatest asset, but it is also its most fragile one. If an adversary figures out the specific radar frequency, or the specific angle that makes the plane visible, the entire multi-trillion-dollar investment is compromised.
So the export control is not just about who has the money, it is about who can be trusted to keep the secrets and whose strategic interests align so closely with the United States that the risk is worth it. With Israel, the alignment is nearly total when it comes to containing Iran. The Adir is a tool for that specific job.
I want to go back to the electronic warfare part for a second. Daniel mentioned disabling targets. Is it possible for an F-35 to actually disable a plane's electronics without even firing a missile? Like, could you just fry their avionics with a high-powered microwave or a focused radar beam?
We're moving into the realm of what is publicly known versus what is classified, but the short answer is yes. That is the direction we are heading. The F-35's radar, the APG-81, is an active electronically scanned array. It is not just for seeing. It can be used as a very powerful directed energy weapon to jam or even damage enemy sensors. While most confirmed kills are still kinetic, meaning a missile actually hits the target, the soft kill, where you render the enemy plane useless through electronic interference, is a huge part of the engagement.
So in Daniel's scenario, the Yak-130 might have been effectively dead in the air before the missile even left the rail. Its pilot might have been staring at a blank screen, unable to communicate, unable to see anything, while the Adir was just lining up the shot.
That is exactly what likely happened. It is a terrifying way to go. You are in a high-performance jet, but suddenly you are just a passenger in a metal box that cannot see or hear. And then, out of nowhere, you are hit by a missile you never saw coming. This is why the F-35 is often called a quarterback in the sky. It is not just playing the game, it is controlling the entire environment.
It is a massive shift from the 1980s, which was the last time we saw this kind of frequent air-to-air combat in the region. Back then, it was F-4 Phantoms and F-14 Tomcats. It was about who could turn tighter and who had the better heat-seeking missile. Now, it is about who has the better algorithm and the better signal processing.
And that brings us to the second-order effects. If air combat is now defined by electronic warfare and stealth, what does that mean for countries that cannot afford fifth-generation fighters? Does it mean they are just permanently obsolete in a high-intensity conflict?
It certainly creates a massive gap. We are seeing a world of haves and have-nots. If you have the F-35, you have a level of regional dominance that is hard to challenge. If you do not, you are forced to rely on asymmetric tactics, like drones and swarms, which is exactly what Iran has been doing. They know they cannot win a dogfight against an Adir, so they try to overwhelm the system with volume.
Which is why the integration of the Adir with systems like Iron Dome and David Sling is so critical. It is all one big network. The plane is just one node in a much larger machine designed to maintain that qualitative military edge we talked about.
You know, thinking about Daniel's question on how the US controls these sales, it also makes me think about the future of the program. We are already talking about 6th-generation fighters. The F-35 is going to be the backbone for decades. But the next step is even more focused on autonomous wingmen and even more advanced electronic warfare.
Right, the Next Generation Air Dominance Program, or NGAD. It is going to take everything we are seeing with the F-35 and push it even further. We are talking about planes that might not even have a pilot in them, or a single pilot controlling a fleet of drones. The export controls for that are going to be even more insane. I cannot imagine the United States sharing that level of technology with more than 2 or 3 countries at most.
It really highlights how military technology is the ultimate currency of diplomacy. You do not just buy an F-35, you buy a seat at the table with the United States military establishment. You are essentially tying your national security to American software updates.
That is a great point, Korn. It is a form of soft power backed by very hard hardware. If you fall out of favor with Washington, your Air Force can be grounded just by a software lockout. It is the ultimate leash.
So, to summarize for Daniel, yes, modern air combat is absolutely defined by electronic warfare and beyond visual range engagements. The Adir is the pinnacle of that right now, especially with the Israeli modifications. And the US controls it through a very tight web of legal requirements, strategic alignment, and software black boxes. It is not just a plane, it is a geopolitical contract.
Well said. And I think this engagement over Tehran is going to be studied in every war college in the world for the next 50 years. It is the moment the future of air combat actually arrived. It is no longer theoretical.
It is a sobering thought. The technology is incredible, but the implications for global stability are complex. We are seeing the threshold for what constitutes a manageable conflict being pushed further and further.
And for our listeners, if you want to dive deeper into how these systems actually talk to each other, check out episode 884, where we discussed the US-Israel hybrid missile defense. It really puts this F-35 engagement into a larger context of how the two countries are essentially merging their digital battlefields.
That is a great recommendation. And honestly, this topic is so deep we could probably do another 3 episodes on just the radar specs alone. But I think we have given Daniel a good starting point for his questions.
I hope so. It is a lot to take in. The world changed a little bit this week, at least in the world of military aviation.
It definitely did. Before we wrap up, I want to say a huge thank you to everyone who has been listening and supporting the show. We've been doing this for a long time, 927 episodes now, and the community we have built is just fantastic.
It really is. We love getting these prompts from Daniel and from all of you. It keeps us on our toes and forces us to keep digging into the research.
If you are enjoying the show, please take a second to leave us a review on your podcast app or on Spotify. It genuinely helps other curious people find us and join the conversation. We see every review and we really appreciate the feedback.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference. You can also find our full archive and a contact form at myweirdprompts.com. We have an RSS feed there too if you want to subscribe directly.
Thanks again for joining us today. This has been My Weird Prompts. I am Corn Puffleberry.
And I am Herman Puppleberry. We will see you next time.
Stay curious, everyone. Goodbye for now.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My Weird Prompts, that's the close from sloth from man, from long-eared host. My Weird Prompts, until next time, stay curious, keep weird.